At Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, 74-year-old Master Sergeant Elias Monroe stood still as a TSA agent dropped 2 military medals, a silver star and a Purple Heart, into a plastic tray like pocket change. They clinked hollowly against the bin's surface. No glance. No comment. Just the agent's muttered, "Sir, you're delaying the process," eyes already shifting to the next passenger. Elias didn't respond. He bent slowly, deliberately, retrieving the medals with fingers calloused and dark from time and work. The Purple Heart's ribbon had folded in on itself. He gently smoothed it back into shape, then slid it beside the silver star, nestling them both in a velvet case faded with years. His other hand gripped a chestnut cane, the wood worn smooth where his thumb rested. Around him, the line shifted and murmured. Shoes scraped. A child cried. A businessman sighed impatiently behind him. Nobody looked long enough to see what had dropped. Nobody saw the medals. Elias adjusted his charcoal gray suit, shoulders a bit tight, knees slightly stiff, and stepped forward. He moved with the deliberate pace of a man who had learned not to hurry pain. As he walked through the scanner, the machine beeped. "Sir, please remove your belt and go again," the agent said. Elias nodded once, saying nothing. He undid the belt, passed through again, and was waved forward. On the other side, he reassembled himself slowly. Belt. Cane. Velvet box. The old church fan from his late wife's purse. He glanced once toward the TSA agent. No eye contact. He didn't expect it. But something in the way the medals had hit the plastic, without pause, without care, stayed with him. He walked away, a man of iron posture and silent grace, into the indifferent tide of the world. No applause. No salute. Just an old man with medals in a plastic tray. Elias Monroe was born in 1949, in the shadow of a Birmingham rail yard where trains howled through smoke and memory. His grandfather, Elijah Sr., had returned from World War I with a crooked spine and silence in his eyes. His father worked the docks, calloused hands hauling crates that paid just enough to keep the lights on and the roof patched. Their house was 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen. Elias shared a mattress with 2 cousins, fell asleep to the rattle of freight cars and the creak of pine boards. He grew quiet, observant. The men in his family didn't speak much, but when they did, it meant something. His grandfather once said, "The world don't owe you kindness, so you better carry your own." In 1968, Elias was drafted. 19 years old. Skinny but broad-shouldered, he reported to Fort Benning with a Bible, a borrowed suitcase, and his grandfather's watch. Vietnam swallowed him whole. He landed in Long An Province in late summer, where rain slicked everything and the jungle never slept. His unit called him "Preacher," because he kept a prayer card in his helmet and rarely cursed. But when the shooting started, he was the one who moved first. At 21, Elias was promoted to squad leader. His men followed him because he didn't panic. He knew how to listen to the land. He knew how to return fire only when it mattered. The Silver Star came after a mission near Rach Kien. Private Ruiz was hit, left behind in a ravine as the unit pulled out under heavy fire. Elias went back. Carried Ruiz on his shoulders for 3 miles through enemy territory. His shirt soaked in blood that wasn't his. 6 weeks later, a booby trap took out his left leg below the thigh. It didn't sever it, but the shrapnel cracked the bone and left metal embedded deep. He refused evacuation until the others were secure. He woke up in a field hospital, then spent 6 months recovering in Japan and Texas. They pinned the Purple Heart to his chest in silence. When he came home in 1971, America looked away. The Birmingham bus station didn't welcome him. The clerk barely glanced at the uniform. A man in a suit muttered "baby killer" under his breath. No parade. No thanks. Elias took it the way he took most things, with quiet. He used his GI Bill to attend Alabama A&M, studied logistics. Wore a knee brace under his slacks and walked with a cane he carved himself. That's where he met Darlene. She studied music education, sang in the campus choir. She saw the limp and asked gently, "Was it bad?" He nodded. She didn't ask again. They married in '74, rented a small house on the East End, and had 3 daughters, Shirley, Nina, and Teresa. He worked at the post office. 32 years, never late. Wore pressed shirts, carried a thermos, memorized every zip code in the city. At night, he sat on the porch and listened to the world move. The medals stayed in a coffee tin under the bed. Not because he was ashamed, but because the world didn't seem to want them. His daughters once found them. Nina asked why they weren't on display. He answered simply, "Some things you carry quiet." Elias kept to himself. He voted, paid his taxes, taught his girls how to change tires and write checks. Darlene taught them hymns and how to forgive. When riots flared on television, Elias said only, "Pain don't start fires. But it'll stand near one." He didn't belong to any veterans club. Didn't attend reunions. He went to work, came home, held Darlene's hand during gospel broadcasts, and never once raised his voice indoors. Time passed. The limp worsened. Cold weather made his leg seize. Some mornings he sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing it like an old wound he'd stopped trying to fix. Darlene began to forget things in 2015. Burned rice. Misplaced keys. By 2017, a neurologist named it Parkinson's. Her fingers shook. Her balance failed. Elias became her caretaker. No complaint. He learned how to fold blankets just right, how to cut pills, how to clean spills without waking her. He sang hymns when her speech faltered. Hummed when she wept. They stopped going to church in 2019. Too many steps. Too many stairs. She passed in April 2020. Hospital rules said no visitors. A nurse took pity, wheeled Darlene to a window so Elias could see her one last time. He pressed his hand to the glass. She couldn't lift hers. The funeral was small. He wore the gray suit he'd saved for Easter. The church fan she always carried rested on the casket. Afterward, he returned home, set the fan on the nightstand, and closed the bedroom door. The coffee tin stayed where it was, but now, he opened it once a week. Held the medals. Held the ribbon Darlene once tied in her Bible. He sat on the porch every morning, still. And remembered a country that sent him to war but forgot how to welcome him back. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of Hartsfield-Jackson as Elias sat alone near gate A24, his cane balanced against one knee. His flight to San Diego was in 90 minutes. He hadn't flown in over 12 years. He wore the same charcoal gray suit, creased neatly, shoulders still tight. His dress shoes were polished, though the left one was scuffed near the toe from the way he dragged that leg. In his lap, he held a small carry-on bag and the velvet box containing his medals. The handle was fraying, but he carried it like something sacred. A folded paper rested in his coat pocket. His granddaughter Kiana's commissioning ceremony, Air Force Officer Training School. Second Lieutenant Kiana Monroe. First in her class. She'd called 3 times that week. "Grandpa, I want you there. I want you front row." He promised her he would be. He'd taken the train to the airport. The TSA line was long, winding. He stood quietly, adjusting the strap of his bag as families jostled, phones buzzed, and agents called out instructions like drill sergeants without conviction. The line moved too fast for his leg, then not at all. When he reached the conveyor belt, he removed his shoes, his belt, his watch. Then, carefully, he placed the velvet case containing his silver star and purple heart in a plastic bin alongside his wallet and Darlene's old church fan. The agent didn't look. He watched his life pass through an X-ray screen as if it were disposable. The fan slid down the rollers and bumped the wall. The purple heart slipped and clinked against the tray's edge, spinning slightly before settling. No one noticed. He bent to retrieve it. Behind him, a man sighed audibly. Should have done pre-check. Another voice whispered, always someone holding it up. Elias rose slowly. Not from pain. From patience. The metals didn't weigh much, but they pressed heavy in his hand. He limped through the scanner again, arms raised like surrender. The machine beeped. He removed his suspenders. It beeped again. They scanned his cane. Sir, please step aside. He stood still while they patted him down. Their hands moved quick, impersonal, like they were scrubbing the memory of who he was. No one asked why he wore a metal brace. No one looked at the card in his wallet marked 100% disabled veteran. The process ended without apology. His items were handed back in silence. He walked to a bench and sat down slowly. The church fan, now slightly bent, rested on top of his bag. Kiana had sent him her OTS class photo. She stood front and center, posture straight, her eyes like Darlene's, alert and warm. She was the reason he'd chosen to fly. The reason he'd pulled the medals out of the tin and put them in the velvet box she gave him. He remembered when she was 5, placing them over her stuffed animals and calling them brave. He'd told her quietly, "These ain't toys." She said, "I know. They're promises." Elias never told her how long he'd kept them hidden. How long he'd believed they meant nothing outside of the jungle. But for Kiana, they meant legacy. That's what she called it. Legacy. He adjusted his tie and glanced at the departure board. DL 847, on time. He felt the ache of fatigue in his back, the familiar pull in his left hip. The cane rested across his lap, hands folded over it. He didn't fidget, didn't pace. Just waited. The airport noise blurred into a low hum. Wheels rolling, pages turning, voices over loudspeakers. The world moved around him like it always had, fast, impatient, unseeing. A child spilled juice nearby. The mother pulled the child sharply away. "Be careful, don't get it on people." The sticky liquid crept toward Elias's shoe. He lifted his foot with effort, just in time. The mother didn't look at him. Just muttered, "Sorry," and pulled the child down the concourse. He took out a handkerchief and wiped his shoe anyway. When the boarding call came, he rose with the second group. Slowly. Steadily. The agent scanned his ticket without looking up. He shuffled toward the jet bridge, moving with practiced care. A flight attendant met him halfway. "Welcome aboard, sir. Need help finding your seat?" He nodded once. 24A. She gestured toward the back. Middle of the cabin, left side. He moved past full rows. Young man with earbuds. Couple whispering. Businessmen typing already. No one made eye contact. When he reached the seat, he found a window view and a narrow space barely wide enough for his shoulders. He tucked the velvet case into the seat pocket. Sat carefully. Buckled in. He placed the fan and his cane beneath the seat. As passengers boarded, someone accidentally bumped his shoulder. "Sorry, old-timer," they muttered. He didn't respond. The plane filled with noise, storage bins slamming shut, safety instructions droning. He closed his eyes. Thought of Kiana in her blue uniform. Thought of Darlene's voice saying, "Lift your chin." He felt the press of shame, not his own, but something older. Something systemic. Something he'd carried since 1971, when a neighbor told him, "You made it back, but for what?" He'd spent 5 decades trying to answer that. And even now, medals resting inches from his chest, the answer wasn't clear. But he was going to San Diego. Not for closure. Not for gratitude. For her. Because she still believed legacy meant something. And maybe that was enough. Captain Anita Vasquez walked the length of the tarmac beside Delta Flight 847, clipboard in hand, the Georgia sun glinting off the fuselage. Her boots tapped softly on the concrete, a rhythm she'd kept since her first deployment. She ran a hand along the engine's edge, nodded to the crew chief, and signed off on the pre-flight log. The cockpit checklist waited. But her eyes kept drifting to the terminal windows, scanning faces behind glass. It was habit. Before the Air Force, before commercial flights, Anita had flown Black Hawks in Iraq and medevac birds in Mosul. 12 years of watching people leave and return. Some never did. Back in the jetway, a flight attendant pulled her aside. "Captain, quick note. There was a delay at security. Older man. Passenger 24A. They made him take out some medals. Dropped them in a bin." TSA didn't say a word. One rolled off the belt. Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "Medals?" "Yeah. Silver Star, Purple Heart." He looked worn. Like the real kind. She didn't reply. Just nodded once and continued on. In the cockpit, the seat felt too soft. She ran through the pre-takeoff list with her co-pilot, an amiable younger man named Curtis. He handled the checkboxes. She listened to the engine tones, to the flow of the cabin behind her. Medals in a tray. Her grandfather, Armando Vasquez, had been in Korea. Came home to nothing but silence. She'd grown up watching him polish his boots each Sunday, even when he couldn't walk without a cane anymore. He never talked about what happened there. But he never missed a flag ceremony, either. She secured her harness, ran a systems check. Then stood up. "I'll be back," she told Curtis. "Everything okay?" "Just a quick walk." She stepped through the cockpit curtain and into the aisle, nodding to the crew as she passed. Row after row, parents wrangling toddlers, businessmen on calls, students with headphones, blurred past her. Until she reached 24A. The man sat quietly, hands folded over his cane. A velvet box was tucked in the seat pocket ahead of him. The church fan lay gently across his lap. His gaze was fixed forward, not at the window. Not at anything. She saw his suit before she saw his face, neatly pressed, tight at the shoulders. His shoes polished. Left knee turned slightly outward. Old injury. She crouched next to his seat. "Excuse me, sir. I'm Captain Vasquez. I'll be flying this aircraft today." He turned, slow and steady. Deep-set eyes. Weathered skin. A calm that didn't come from ease, but from surviving what others hadn't. She offered her hand. He took it, firm grip. "Master Sergeant Elias Monroe," he said. She nodded. "I heard what happened at security." He didn't answer. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a coin, black metal with a gold eagle. The Air Force's Commendation Challenge coin. "May I?" she asked. He nodded. She placed it gently beside the fan on his lap. Then she said nothing. Neither did he. Silence passed between them, not awkward, not rushed. Then she stood. "If you need anything, you let me know." He nodded again. She turned, moved down the aisle, then paused. A teenage boy in 24C watched her closely. She leaned down to him. "That man," she said softly, "is someone you should remember." The boy blinked. "Yes, ma'am." She returned to the cockpit. Curtis glanced up. "All set?" "Not yet." She picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The cabin quieted. I want to take a moment before we depart to recognize someone on board. Every head turned. Every conversation ceased. In seat 24A is Master Sergeant Elias Monroe, United States Army, retired. He served in Vietnam with distinction and valor. He holds both the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. Silence thickened. Earlier today, he was subjected to a security process that failed to honor that service. We cannot undo that. But we can choose to acknowledge it now. A pause. This aircraft will not depart until he receives the respect denied to him at the checkpoint. No one moved. Then someone clapped. Then another. A ripple of applause rose, slow at first, then growing into something fuller, rounder. A man in first class stood and removed his hat. A woman reached across the aisle and touched Elias's hand. The teenager beside him turned awkwardly and offered a fist bump. Elias didn't speak. He looked to the front of the plane, toward the voice that had named him. Captain Vasquez stepped back from the intercom. Curtis said nothing. "You okay, Cap?" She nodded once. "I'm tired of people forgetting." In the cabin, a flight attendant approached Elias. "Sir, Captain Vasquez would like you to sit in the flight deck jump seat for takeoff." He shook his head slowly. "I'm fine here." But she didn't leave. "She insists." Passengers moved aside as Elias stood, cane in hand, medals in pocket. He walked slowly, each step measured. No ceremony. No salute. Just motion. As he passed, a man in business class rose to his feet. Others followed. The aisle became a corridor of standing passengers. He did not bow. He did not wave. He just kept walking. Vasquez stood at the cockpit door, waiting. "You didn't have to," he said. "I did," she replied. He stepped into the cockpit. She closed the door behind him. The plane, the flight, the world, they could all wait. The cockpit was quiet, just the hum of instruments and the low static of radio chatter. Captain Vasquez guided Elias into the jump seat behind hers, helped him buckle the worn leather strap across his chest. She adjusted his headset gently, her fingers steady. "Let me know if the pressure gets uncomfortable," she said. Elias nodded. "I've flown through worse." Vasquez smiled faintly. "So have I." From behind her, Elias could see the expanse of sky wading through the windscreen. Rows of blinking lights along the runway. A world poised for motion. Curtis, the co-pilot, turned and offered a respectful nod. "It's an honor, Master Sergeant." Elias gave a short reply. "Thank you, son." Then silence. Not empty. Just full of things that didn't need saying. Tower cleared them for departure. Engines rumbled, the aircraft nudged forward. Through his headset, Elias heard the captain's calm commands, the way she spoke with precision, each word chosen, each tone measured. As the jet lifted from the tarmac, the city fell away. From above, Atlanta looked quiet. Small. Elias watched the clouds stretch like roads he hadn't walked in decades. In the cabin, passengers settled back into their seats. The applause had faded, but something lingered, a hush, a shared awareness. The teenager from 24C scrolled through his phone, then tucked it away. He kept glancing at the empty seat beside him, the velvet box still resting in the pocket. Across the aisle, a woman whispered to her husband, pointing subtly toward the cockpit. In first class, a businessman began typing something into his tablet, paused, then deleted it. Something had changed. At cruising altitude, Vasquez turned slightly in her seat. "I'm sorry for what happened back there." At security. Elias didn't look up. "It's not the first time." "No," she said. "But it should have been the last." He studied the skyline beyond the window. Most people don't see what they're not trained to see. She nodded. I was trained by a grandfather who kept his medals in a shoebox under the bed. Same as you, probably. He let out a quiet breath that might have been agreement. Vasquez turned back to her controls. We'll land at San Diego just after 1700. There'll be someone from our ground team waiting to escort you to the terminal. I'm not hard to find. Still, she said. Someone should walk beside you. They descended over the Pacific, the sun pulling long shadows across the water. As the wheels touched down, the cabin held a quiet respect. No one clapped. But no one rushed the aisle, either. The seatbelt chime sounded. Vasquez helped Elias unbuckle, led him through the narrow passage between seats. As they reached the front, the flight attendant stepped aside, eyes lowered in quiet acknowledgement. The pilot's voice returned over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience today. For those still seated, please allow Master Sergeant Monroe to disembark first. No one moved. Elias stepped into the jetway slowly. On the other side, a Delta employee in uniform stood waiting, older man, close-cropped hair, wearing a small pin that read Vietnam Veteran. He saluted. Elias nodded. At ease. They walked together in silence. In the San Diego terminal, a crowd gathered at Gate 16. Dress blues. Cadets. Family. Officers. The Air Force Officer Training School commissioning ceremony had just ended. Kiana Monroe, second lieutenant, stood near the edge of the group, searching the hallway. Then she saw him. Grandpa. She stepped forward quickly, eyes wide with something deeper than joy, something like reverence. He stopped. She came to attention. Saluted. He hesitated only a moment, then returned the salute. Her voice didn't waver. Request permission to hug my grandfather. He smiled, something fragile. Permission granted. They embraced. Later, at the family dinner in a quiet house near Coronado, the medals sat in the center of the table. Not displayed, just placed there, visible, silent. Beside them, Kiana's commissioning certificate. She wore her uniform jacket unbuttoned, a ribbon from Elias's Purple Heart tied around her wrist like a thread through time. People talked softly, her parents, cousins, neighbors. But Elias listened more than he spoke. When Kiana stood to offer a toast, she didn't raise her glass right away. She placed her hand on the medals. These were never just for him, she said. They were for the ones who couldn't speak. For the ones who came home quietly and were forgotten. My grandfather carried them for all of us. She raised her glass. To dignity. To memory. To those who walk ahead so we don't have to walk alone. They drank in silence. And Elias, seated at the far end of the table, touched the velvet box gently. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The chapel at Lackland Air Force Base was nearly empty the next morning, long after the ceremony had ended. The sun filtered through tall windows in dusty shafts, catching dust motes in slow dance. Wooden pews stretched in rows, worn by years of quiet prayers and louder goodbyes. Elias stood alone near the front. He held his cane loosely. The suit hung more easily on him now, creased from travel, but dignified. Kiana's ribbon was still tied around his wrist. He turned it absently, once, then let his hand fall to his side. The medals remained in the velvet box, now resting on the chapel's altar, not as a symbol, but as a gesture. A way of saying, this happened. I was here. And I remember. Behind him, footsteps echoed softly. Kiana approached, still in uniform. Her cap tucked under one arm. You all right? She asked. He nodded once. She didn't speak again. Just stood beside him. Outside, 2 rows of cadets filed past the chapel window, laughing, talking, full of forward motion. Elias watched them, unmoving. "They'll never know the things we know," he said quietly. Kiana didn't answer immediately. "Then, they'll carry what we give them. Even if they don't understand it yet." He looked at her. Noticing, maybe for the first time, just how much she resembled Darlene, same posture, same steady eyes. "You were 9, he said, "when I told you about the jungle. I remember. I thought maybe I'd said too much." "You didn't." He nodded again. Silence filled the space between them, warm and not empty. "I almost didn't come," he said finally. "I know. But I'm glad I did." She turned to him. "So am I." He picked up the velvet box, pressed the lid closed with care. They walked together toward the chapel doors. The sun outside was sharper now, brighter. Their steps echoed against the marble. At the exit, he paused. One last glance back. Pews. Light. The echo of her voice promising to remember. Then he stepped into the sun. Back at her apartment, the ceremony photos arrived in a digital album. Elias sat beside Kiana as she clicked through them, white gloves, salutes, cadets tossing caps in slow arc. But the photo that stopped them was simpler. It showed Elias, standing beside her, hand resting on her shoulder. Both looking forward. Both wearing the same steady expression. She printed it that night. Framed it in oak. Placed it next to her OTS certificate. 2 weeks later, Elias sat on his porch in Birmingham. Same wood steps. Same railing Darlene had painted 20 years ago. The air smelled of magnolia and freshly cut grass. The mailman, a young man in his 20s, spotted him from the curb. "Morning, Mr. Monroe." Elias lifted a hand in greeting. "Morning. Got something certified today." The mailman stepped onto the porch, handed over a slim envelope. "Looks official." Elias took it carefully, examined the return address. Department of Veterans Affairs. He opened it slowly, unfolded the letter. His benefits had been updated. A note acknowledged an error in his records. A correction had been made. He would receive back pay, with interest. A counselor's number was listed for any additional questions or support services. He folded the letter. Placed it inside the church fan Darlene had once carried. Tucked both into the coffee tin beneath his bed. Later, he wrote a note in neat script. "Do not discard. History inside." He taped it to the lid. At Sunday service, Kiana took the pulpit. Not as a preacher, but as someone asked to speak to the youth. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a blazer, the ribbon from Elias's medal still knotted at her wrist. She spoke plainly. Not about war. Not about medals. But about listening. "There are people among us who carry more than we see," she said. "Sometimes what they carry isn't visible, but it's sacred." She looked down, found her grandfather in the third row. He sat quietly, as he always had, back straight, hands folded over his cane. "I once asked my grandfather why he kept his medals in a tin under the bed," she continued. "He said they weren't meant to be looked at. They were meant to be remembered." Months passed. Elias returned to his daily walks, slower now, with the help of a new brace from the VA clinic. Nurses knew his name. Said hello. Respected the quiet around him. He began volunteering at the community center on Saturdays. Helped young men fill out job applications, taught them how to iron a shirt, how to listen without talking. Once, a boy named Jarrell asked what the cane was for. Elias smiled gently. Old promise. Jarrell didn't understand. But he nodded, respectful. On the first anniversary of Kiana's commissioning, she mailed Elias a new ribbon. She'd worn it on her deployment, she wrote. Afghanistan. Nothing dramatic. Just routine. But she'd tied the ribbon around her wrist the whole time. "I carry you with me," she wrote. "Because you carried us." He framed the letter, placed it above his nightstand. When a local journalist came to interview him, after hearing of the ceremony aboard Delta 847, Elias declined. "I'm not a story," he said. But he gave her a line for the article. "Dignity's not about medals. It's about memory. And who keeps it alive?" By winter, the coffee tin under the bed had grown heavier, not with medals, but with notes, ribbons, photographs. A legacy, slow built. One piece at a time. Not loud. Not large. But permanent. Just like him. He was seen. He was remembered.